From the moment she first appeared on screen in 1999, Lois Griffin defied every expectation of what a cartoon sitcom mother was supposed to be. On the surface, she looked like any other TV mom. Calm, nurturing, well-groomed, and perpetually tolerant of her husband's absurd antics. But if you've watched Family Guy beyond just a few episodes, you already know this woman is anything but ordinary. She's complicated, she's chaotic, and in her quietest moments, she's arguably the most psychologically rich character in the entire series.
The sensei is a sacred position. I could never violate the spiritual bond of the student-master relationship.
Oh, then allow me.
But to truly understand Lois Griffin, to peel back the layers of her contradictions, her morality, her rage, her strength, and her descent into something far darker than most viewers realize, we need to go back, way back, to the very beginning, before she was a Griffin, before she was a wife, before she was a mother, before the suburban mask ever had to exist. She was born Lois Pewterschmidt, the daughter of Carter and Barbara Pewterschmidt, one of the wealthiest, most elitist, and emotionally detached families on the eastern seaboard. Raised in the privilege of a Newport mansion, Lois's early years were marked by extravagance on the outside, but emotional deprivation on the inside. Her father, Carter, ruled the household like a monarch. His ideology was cold, conservative, and ruthlessly classist. To him, appearances mattered more than affection. Emotions were a weakness. Compassion was a liability. And money, above all, was the only real currency of value. Barbara, her mother, was distant in a different way. Polite, soft-spoken, and tragically passive, Barbara always stood in the background, playing the perfect wife to a husband who never truly loved her. For Lois, childhood was a mansion-sized prison of silk sheets and silent dinners. A house where warmth didn't exist unless it came from a fireplace. And even that warmth wasn't meant for her. Lois grew up knowing what she was expected to become. Obedient, elegant, and above all, useful in the family's social and economic schemes. Her education was elite. She studied piano, attended boarding school, and learned how to host a cocktail party before she ever learned how to emotionally regulate. But beneath the surface of this polished heiress, there was always rebellion.
Stop it, Lois!
No! I'm so sick of your crap!
Always restlessness. Always a storm. That storm would finally find its first crack of release when Lois met Peter Griffin.
Power boy!
Now, the Lois-Peter love story is often told in Family Guy with humor, satire, and absurdity, and that's intentional. But if you strip away the laughs and look at it for what it really was, it wasn't just a love story. It was an act of defiance, a rejection of everything the Pewterschmidt name stood for. Peter was poor, unrefined, crass, and deeply unambitious. But to Lois, he was something no one else in her world had ever been. Real. Their relationship began in the unlikeliest of places. Peter was working as a towel boy at the Pewterschmidt Country Club. It was here that their chemistry, though odd to outsiders, ignited. Peter didn't care about etiquette or class. He didn't care about her wealth or status. He was loud, he was weird, he was inappropriate. But he made her laugh. He made her feel something. And for a girl raised in a house of ice, laughter was the first real sign of life. Lois's parents, especially Carter, were appalled. Their reaction wasn't just about disapproval, it was rage. To them, Peter wasn't just beneath Lois. He was an insult, a humiliation. But Lois didn't flinch. In fact, the more they protested, the more determined she became to be with Peter. And in that one act, choosing Peter over the wealth, over the security, over the respectability of her family name, Lois began her transformation. When she married Peter Griffin, it wasn't just an escape from the Pewterschmidt empire. It was an act of personal revolution. She chose love over legacy, heart over hierarchy, messiness over perfection. And that choice would come to define her identity in the years that followed, for better and for worse. At first, life with Peter was chaotic, but it was also fulfilling in a way she had never experienced. Their home in Quahog was small, their finances were unstable, and Peter was frequently out of work. But Lois was, for the first time, her own woman. She cooked, she cleaned, she raised a family. And even though she had traded her silver spoon for frozen peas and off-brand macaroni, she wore her role like armor. For a while, it seemed like love had conquered all. But nothing in Family Guy stays idyllic for long. The show is famous for its satire and its descent into the absurd. But what people often overlook is how gradually Lois began to change. How the cracks in her patience started to show. How her facade of maternal calm began to fracture. And the deeper you look, the more you realize something important. Lois Griffin didn't just marry Peter to escape her family. She married Peter thinking she could fix him. And that, right there, is where her story starts to darken. Because Peter Griffin, well, for all his comedic value, is not a man who evolves. He's childish. He's impulsive. He's often cruel without realizing it. And slowly, year after year, Lois began to absorb the emotional labor of their entire family. She became the disciplinarian, the organizer, the voice of reason, and eventually the enabler.
All right, Joe, it's showtime.
When Peter drove drunk and endangered their children, she forgave him. When he humiliated her in public, she laughed it off. When he spent their rent money on stupid schemes, she simply rolled her eyes and cleaned up the mess. And at first glance, this might seem like strength, like loyalty. But in reality, Lois was becoming something far more complicated. A woman who mistook sacrifice for love. Over time, the sacrifices piled up. She put her dreams on hold, gave up her passions, molded herself around Peter's chaos. And the more she did this, the more she lost herself. Not just emotionally, but morally. Because the Lois we meet in early seasons, of the calm, maternal, rational woman, slowly begins to change. She becomes edgier, angrier, more impulsive. She develops a dark sense of humor. She experiments with risky behavior. She becomes violent, sexual, manipulative. And while the show often plays this for laughs, the truth is far more tragic. Lois Griffin is not evolving. She's unraveling. And that unraveling doesn't just affect her, it affects everyone around her, especially her children. Meg Griffin, the most neglected and emotionally abused member of the family,
I didn't say anything.
You just did. Your voice, it's cluttering up my space. Get out.
But
is often seen as the family punching bag. But what most people forget is that Lois, not Peter, is often the most emotionally damaging parent to Meg. She insults her, dismisses her, berates her for her looks, her intelligence, even her existence. And while Peter's cruelty is often idiotic and unintentional, Lois's is cold, calculated, sometimes even gleeful. There are episodes where Lois straight up admits she wishes Meg was never born, and others where she tells her daughter she's a failure. There's even one where she says she loves the family dog more than her own child. And while this could be dismissed as satire, it speaks to something darker. Lois's unresolved resentment, her inability to cope with her own dissatisfaction, her need to feel control when her life spirals into absurdity. And yet, Lois isn't a villain. That's the paradox. She's not evil. She's not heartless. She's a woman who spent her entire life being told what she should be and is now cracking under the weight of trying to be it all. She's a wife to a man who never matures, a mother to 3 emotionally demanding children, a housekeeper, therapist, sexual partner, and moral compass. All while her own needs go unmet, her desires unspoken, and her trauma unprocessed. So she begins to lash out. She begins to act out. And in doing so, Lois becomes one of the most painfully real characters in the show, because she represents what happens when a woman sacrifices herself too many times for too many people and finally starts to snap. In future sections, we'll explore just how far that snapping goes, from infidelity and breakdowns to full-blown criminality and moral corruption. But here, in the first act of her life, the seeds are already planted, and they're growing. Because Lois Griffin, born into wealth, raised to be perfect, trained to suppress everything real, is no longer just trying to survive. She's starting to mutate. And the woman who once defied her father to chase love may now be losing herself to the very chaos she once thought she could tame. For much of Lois Griffin's life, she operated behind a mask. The loving wife, the nurturing mother, the voice of reason in a family driven by chaos. But masks always crack under pressure, and in Lois's case, the breaking point wasn't one single moment of failure, but a slow unraveling of restraint, morality, and control. It was as if all the years she'd spent holding everything together were finally starting to weigh her down. And when that weight became unbearable, the real Lois Griffin began to emerge. We begin to see it in episodes where she's no longer just the sensible one. Instead, she becomes someone with secrets, someone willing to lie, cheat, and manipulate, not for the greater good, but for personal satisfaction. And that's what makes this transformation so painful to watch.
Hit ride?
What? What do you mean?
Here we go. Get ready for blast off. Oh, son of a bitch. Oh my God, Stewie, are you all right?
It isn't sudden, it's subtle. Like a steady leak in a dam, invisible at first until the entire structure bursts. Take, for instance, her gambling addiction. In the episode Atlantic City, she goes on a seemingly harmless trip to a casino, but the facade quickly crumbles. Lois isn't just a little reckless. She spirals, pouring the family's money into machines and tables, with a feverish desperation. There's a glint in her eyes that's almost unrecognizable. Gone is the caring, responsible mother. In her place is a woman driven by compulsion, willing to risk everything for one more hit of dopamine. And when Peter tries to stop her, she lashes out. Her addiction isn't played for laughs here. It's a portrait of a woman at war with herself. The cracks in her perfect image aren't just showing, they're bleeding. But perhaps even more damning is how quickly she abandons her moral code when temptation presents itself. Her infidelity, both emotional and physical, becomes a recurring motif in later seasons. Whether it's flirting with Quagmire or fantasizing about other men, Lois walks a tightrope of betrayal. In model misbehavior, she becomes a swimsuit model, basking in the attention and objectification that once might have disgusted her. She lets the fame consume her, abandoning her family in pursuit of vanity and validation. It's not just selfish, it's revelatory. For the first time, we see what Lois looks like when no one is watching. And it's not always pretty.